Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast about communication. This group project was interesting. We couldn't really decide what we want to do. We were going to try to do a movie, and then we were going to try to do like a play. So we even thought about a PowerPoint, but at the end of the day, we thought, man, what if we did a podcast where you could see our face, you could hear us talking, bantering back and forth. Obviously, you see the wonderful fireside here right next to me. And I think the interesting part of this is it really, our research, as we had our research, but we also had what we have in our daily life. To me, I think it is super important for everybody to communicate. And obviously, you're not in this class if you don't think it's important. And so after doing some significant research for all of us, we think it's important that you give us a chance to give us a listen. And so we have three main subdisciplines of our area. We have conflict and communication, family and relationships, and then, self-disclosure. And so you'll hear from Joey Bandy to start the show, talking about his family, talking about how important it is for communication to be a part of that, daily life, and then the pros and cons of deception and communication. Then next you'll hear from Davin, who's going to talk about self-disclosure and relational development. And then we're going to close with me, my own thoughts about what they've said, and then also I'm going to add my own thing with an interpersonal conflict, as well as gaining friendship. This is going to be a lot of fun. Thank you so much for listening to Thinking Out Loud, and let's get to Joey. Welcome to Thinking Out Loud. Today's topic is interpersonal communications. I'm joined by 20-year-old, 21-year-old, 20-year-old Joey Bandy.
Let's go.
Tom's student, to talk about our first subject here. Joey, I know you're an expert on family communication. Why don't you give me a little bit of a rundown of what that all entails?
So family communication is, I like to think of it as the big umbrella of, like, it's like a big umbrella term of like a lot of different varying forms of communications that go on within a family setting. Now, I know, a family, the definition of family for this can vary. It can be a very super close-knit group of friends, or it can be a very, it can be like blood related. I know that's how my family communications textbook by Galvin has put it. Family communications is definitely, the family part of it definitely varies. But there are a lot of different communication elements that fall under this. There's deception, there's conflict and resolution. There's a lot of theories that fall into it too.
So with family communication, it may not actually just be about your like blood relatives, but it could also be like maybe you're going to church or hanging out with your friends.
Yeah.
So how does each individual quote unquote family differ from one another?
So every family is different. There are some families that, they may seem the same, but they're not even a little bit. Every family has different traditions. They have different, ways of life, if that makes sense. Some families, they do this one specific thing on Christmas. That is, they do it every year. Other families, they do another thing and on the exact same day. And so this kind of shows, how, sure, we also like, all of our families may celebrate Christmas, but we all celebrate in a different way, if that makes sense. So that kind of shows the difference in families.
And so when communicating with your different families, like what kind of things do you have to look out for? Because obviously the way you talk to your brothers and sisters versus your grandmas is like completely different. Because like I
Yeah.
know growing up with two younger siblings, like how they talk to me and how I talk to them is different than how I might address my grandma or great grandma or anything like that.
So that kind of falls underneath the communication accommodation theory. That one talks about how, with your, whenever you go talk to your grandma, the odds of, you're gonna have to probably speak up because your grandma's hearing is probably not going to be as good as your brothers and sisters. So you're kind of accommodating them into the conversation. That can go, that can be a variety of different ways to do that. That can be in, maybe your brother doesn't like to text, so you have to call him, or they doesn't want to FaceTime, he wants to Zoom. They can do, that's kind of that's kind of you accommodating them. And so it can vary, how you talk to each person. Yeah, you're more likely to be, a lot more of like best friends with your siblings because you're usually under the same roof, and you're usually going through this a lot of the same experiences within the family, compared to someone like your grandma who you probably see a few times a week.
So I guess to wrap this conversation up, we obviously develop a different system for a friend group or even in classrooms and things like that. What is the importance of having a system of values or a system of understanding? How does that benefit your communications with your different families?
It benefits it immensely, because that system is how you grow up. That is how that system is, the system that you're brought up in. If you have a very open system, if your parents, if they make sure that they open your eyes to the world, they give you a very diverse system, you're more likely to be a very open person. You're more likely to accept change. You're more likely to be more inclusive compared to some people who get raised on a closed system. A closed system, you're less likely to like change. You're more likely to just stick by the book that your parents taught you. And so it's very interesting how varying systems can lead to varying results because of just the way the systems are made.
So transition off of systems. Another topic that I know you're quite familiar with is deception and communication. And one of the things I've highlighted with deception personally, over my years of communicating, is that deception can be both a positive and a negative. Can you provide an example when it would actually be a positive to use deception?
So a positive example that I've heard, and when I talk to my teachers about this, is whenever it's always very difficult to be deceptive in in general, because you're purposely leaving out something. But an example that I heard that was really a positive was a grandma was dying and she didn't want the little kids to know what was going on, and so she had her family lie to kind of protect them from the truth. And yes, it is, it is sad that you had to deceive them in that, but that is one of the positives of it, because you're kind of giving somebody their last wish, if that makes sense, to like just to spare them from that pain.
Interesting. Another like example I can think of with the deception importance would be something along the lines of maybe using a fake phone number at a bar. Why would deception in those instances be even socially acceptable? Because I think like that is really, one of the things that we're trying to get into people's minds is that just because deception is perceived negative doesn't mean it's always negative, and it needs to be perceived as negative when, especially when you're talking about like communication nowadays on dates, and like if you're uncomfortable or if you're out with people you don't really know, it can be really important.
So the way I look at it is it can be a very useful tool to have. Say you're in a very uncomfortable situation, and you're out, and you're just not comfortable being, and you're not comfortable with the people around you, being able to, kind of just deceive them into thinking, hey, like, maybe I'm going somewhere else and then you getting safe. I know that's a pretty extreme case of it, but that's just one of the that's just one of the various ways that I think deception can be useful. It definitely is a very double-edged sword because you can very easily use deception in a negative way, but there are also a lot of positive ways to look at it.
And obviously there are negatives. So one of the big things I've noticed with deception, especially when it comes to communications, is like, especially in like sports, right? If a coach starts deceiving his players by like falsely believing in them, let's say, you look at the Sacramento Kings who've already fired a coach this season. Their coach was like falsely telling them, "Yeah, I believe we can go out and win every game." When in reality, it's Luke Walton and your team's, okay at best. And at the end of the day, it cost him his job after 2.5 years. Do you think that, deception is also like a net negative for society as a whole, politics, with sports, even with developing relationships amongst your peers?
I think I think it definitely depends on the context. You know, I think, lying to, if you're running for office and straight up lying about the policy that you're going to try and enact, I think that's a very negative thing. But, if you're trying to, I guess, for lack of better terms, rally a group, sometimes a little deception can help them, by saying, if you're Luke Walton, and you're trying to rally a group, you can be like, hey, like I believe in you guys. And I think, yes, it did end up costing him his job, but he was just trying to rally the players, and it's unfortunate it didn't work there. But there have been instances in the past where it has worked, and the players have rallied behind the coach, and they've gone on to be successful.
Well, that's going to wrap up our conversation with Joey here. The next person we'll be talking to is Davin. He'll be talking about his portions of self disclosure and rational development. So stay tuned for that. And thank you again for listening to our wonderful show about interpersonal communication. Up next, I'm joined by our second guest tonight to talk about all things interpersonal communication. I am joined by Davin. Davin, how's it going, buddy?
Pretty good, man. How about you?
I'm hanging in there. It's been a stressful day. But of course, we're here to talk about self-disclosure and that little piece of self-disclosure I did there. Talking about stress and like how we're handling things. One of the things of self-disclosure is that it can be therapeutic. And I wanted you to touch on that. Why is self-disclosure so important? Why is like that therapy aspect so important?
So the reason self-disclosure is so important to, the mental health aspect and, almost like a therapy is it's just you're revealing yourself to someone. And when you truly reveal yourself to someone and you show, your emotions, your feelings and stuff, it not only, builds bonds with people and, shows how two people or two or more people can really be connected. It really just benefits the whole ego and self-esteem to really push you to be a good person. And, it flourishes those certain aspects that, provide you with good conversation and, great things to talk about.
Okay, and so with self-disclosure, of course, there's like always like interesting things going on, right? So like, you might disclose yourself to friends, and the way you do that with other people might be totally different. So can you kind of comment on, how self-disclosure can change from like person to person?
Well, self-disclosure, sometimes you can see where, have you ever met someone and they kind of like told you too much too quick and it was like, kind of weird. Some people kind of get like that, and it may be because they're nervous. And, a new person, obviously you're less likely to disclose, stuff like that to a new person, but in some cases it's different. But to a friend, obviously it depends on the relationship with the friend. Sometimes, two boys or two men won't disclose much as, you will with like your best girlfriend or something like that. And with a coworker, usually that's when things can be pretty short because no one likes being at work. So things like that, a lot of things can affect. Not a lot of things. A lot of the relationship type definitely can affect the amount of self disclosure you give.
And so one of the other things, that relates positively or negatively to self-disclosure is all about relational development. Now, one of the things obviously we talk about is how you develop relationships over time and everything like that. But I've always liked this topic of relational development. Relational development is about preparing for the worst while putting forth your best. It's a quote that I was told in high school. Like building relationships is all about preparing for the worst while putting forward your best. Why is preparing for the worst, especially in today's modern age, with so much double crossing or there's so much negativity? Why is that so important when thinking about building relationships with others?
Well, no one wants to get hurt. I mean, it really sucks putting yourself out there and totally, just getting abandoned or, like you said, double crossed. So, I mean, that's why I believe it's definitely preparing for the worst. But as you're preparing for the worst, you ultimately receive the best. Like a relationship developing is possibly one of the best things that could ever happen to someone. Two people getting close. It's a great gift.
So, um, there's really like 10 parts to relational development. Now, it's split down the middle. There's 5 and 5, as far as 5 for preparing to come together, 5 for coming apart. If you had to choose, is it harder for you to come together with new people to become friends, or is it harder for you to deal with friends who might leave your life? Whether it's they're moving on, don't want to be a part of it anymore, or is it maybe they just need a change of pace or they leave and so you guys kind of just drift apart. Is it harder for you to deal with the after effects or like building up the friendship?
Now, see, that's interesting. To some people, well, I like to look at it this way. It's easy to come together and, start building a friendship if you've never been, leaving one or been, parted ways. So it depends. I believe that it's it's easier to definitely leave than it is to grow if you've been hurt before, if you've been left like that. And that's my opinion on that.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Davin. Of course, this is the second portion of our group project. So my portion will be wrapping us up. But thanks so much again for your insight and talking about your portion of the project. You have a wonderful night.
Of course, thank you. You too.
We've heard from Davin in all of his talks about relational development and self-disclosure. Heard from Joey talk about strength of family values, and also developing deceptions and how it can be important to be deceptive sometimes. And so I'm going to wrap up our awesome conversation today on interpersonal communication here on Thinking Out Loud. And I want to start with interpersonal conflict. And I don't think people realize this enough. It'll happen anywhere. Conflict is everywhere all the time. It can be organizations, it can be friends and family. It's how you fight it or how you combat it, how you deal with it. A lot of people don't like dealing with conflict. It makes them uncomfortable. Well, it's kind of supposed to. And I think that, listening to each other, something that nowadays is so important because no one does. No one listens to anybody anymore. I think those are the kinds of things where we as a society, we as people need to understand that's what we have. So then the other big thing, when you're talking about conflict is really understanding what we need to do to fix conflict. Oftentimes there's some give and take, or there's even moments where you and whoever you're having a conflict with just talk it out. And so the other portion of this is building friendships. And we've kind of heard a little bit about that with the relationships portion, the relational development portion of Davin's talk, where he said, is really important. It's really hard to make friends once you've lost some and things like that. But I think this is my takeaway. I did some research with some external articles, and one according to Forbes.com. You need to keep your friend circle limited. So they made this chart. It's called the 150, 50, 50, and 5. And it's supposed to be your sort of circle of friends. So you have 150 people you know and could talk to if you would like. You have 50 people you regularly keep in touch with, or you keep in touch with at some amount, just to keep tabs on their lives, know things about them, that kind of thing. You have 15 who you would consider yourself close with. They may know a little more about you. You may talk more regularly. And they also are the ones who you may go out of your way to help a little bit more with problems they may be having. And of course, the last one, and probably the most important, the 5 who are your closest friend group. The inner circle is what a lot of people refer to it as. And if you notice, it's all ratioed. So 150 to 15, and then 50 to 5. And so you can skew the numbers a little bit. Let's say you don't want to be friends with 150 people, because that's a lot of people. It really is. But you said, okay, I want to be friends with, 100 people. Well, now instead of 50 in that next circle, there might be like 38, 37. The next circle in might only have 10 instead of 15, and then the 5 might become 4. It's really a good way to practice not devaluing yourself and not overwhelming yourself with some of these friendships. And then I think my biggest thing with developing and getting friendships, because friends do help make life easier. Having people you can talk to and rely on makes life easier. The process varies person to person. For me, I love, one-on-one conversations just like this. For others, they might prefer to do things in groups and then select people based on how their group is going. I think that there's merits to anything. If you join a club and you want to be friends with specific people in the club, or if you seek individuals out, just be like, okay, this guy over here, he looks cool. He has my aesthetic, whatever. However you do it, just make sure that you're also taking time to reflect on how things went. Because sometimes you may make an advance towards a friend. You may try to become friends with somebody and they don't reciprocate those feelings. So knowing maybe, did you do something wrong or did you not, or whatever. And those are the important things when talking about gaining friendship and building, upon interpersonal conflict. To conclude today, I want to thank the guests we had. Obviously, Joey and Davin are part of this class, part of this group, but they wanted to do a podcast for them. And, I think it was a lot of fun to do for sure. And we talked a lot about Joey's first strengthening his family values, and then also pros and cons of deception and using it in your daily life. And then we kind of moved on and talked about Gavin's self-disclosure and how therapy is so important, and then how you can use your therapeutic side to develop relations with other people. And then we get to more interpersonal conflict and how to handle it or how to appropriately address it when issues arise. And then how to make friends and how it varies from person to person. And how if at the end of this, if all you learn is the 150, 50, 15, 5, that's such a good general idea of like what a friend group should look like. We want to thank you for listening to our show about interpersonal communication. It helps you prepare for your final or whatever endeavors you may have in further communications. And of course, thank you, Mr. Mike, for allowing us this group work activity, even though it was a little dicey there for a while. So cheers. Have a great day.